Hi class, it's Tuesday 2/20, recording chapter 7 this week. I'm actually going to stop my video so our file sizes get to be a little smaller. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So before I get started, I want to let you know that you may have gotten a bunch of notifications from Brightspace that I evaluated work. I was getting notifications even though I auto accept your not your Pearson stuff, your Brightspace stuff. So you don't get the notifications that you have work due. But I also have to publish feedback and everything to get the prompts away from me. So that's what that was. And I'm going to use that platform to communicate back to you if you've missed anything in a given week or if I really liked or didn't like what you did. So that's why you got all those notifications. So like I said, we're going to talk about telecommunications, the internet, wireless technology, really networking. If we look at what a network is, I'm going to take you to LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile. I think I showed you all. LinkedIn's a great place for social media communication within a professional landscape. I hope you all will add me to your networks. It's not a requirement for the chapter, but I like to build my network and be able to help you all in your careers. That's a good way to do it. But we're going to talk about more, of course, computer-based networks. We're going to see that there's a law out there that says the value of your network grows as nodes are attached to it, meaning a LinkedIn profile with no connections really has no value, but one with 10,000 connections that are pretty active is very valuable. That's the same thing with computers. The bare bone definition of a computer network is two computers talking to each other, connected to some some type of medium that will take a signal from one place to another. And we'll learn what those are today. We're going to look at the components of networks, not so much cellular networks, even though they are getting very big, and I'll talk into 5G home service. We'll look at the different types of networks, meaning LAN or local area network, WAN or wide area network, and so on. We'll get a little behind the scenes look at how the internet works and what a protocol called TCP/IP is and how that has enabled global e-business. And we'll look at some standards along the way. Our first case in our text deals with the NHL and its use of wireless technologies. We look at the problems, challenges sport to track. It's very high paced. The puck, if you're not familiar with hockey or sports in general, it's a thick black rubber disc that's frozen that goes across ice. Well, the NHL has a problem with viewership. It's a great game to see live. It's challenged to watch, frankly, and we had two big games over the weekend. The Devils played the Flyers and the Islanders played the Rangers, both at MetLife Arena. And I actually happened to be at the home of the Islanders on Sunday to see St. John's lose again. And they had a watch party for this game at MetLife Arena in their stadium series, so these games were outside. And I noticed some AI that is not in our textbook. So solutions say adopt a digital strategy, select wireless technology, revised game tracking. I want to show you a video from the NHL All-Star game 2 weeks ago. It's about 4 minutes, and it'll show some challenges of watching hockey, and it'll show some things that wireless technology and sensor networks do to help enable ease of viewing. We'll see player names get highlighted on the screen in particular. The text goes into their puck and player tracking system, which I'm going to show you a bit of today. And it illustrates the use of Internet of Things, devices that shouldn't be on the internet that are to help us watch something that is a bit harder to watch at home. And I gotta pause my share for a second. So I know I didn't enable sound.
To be played. Here's McKinnon on a breakaway. He scores. Nathan McKinnon with the first goal of this All-Star game. And there's a goal that ties it up. Boone Jenner in his first All-Star game in his 11th season. Near home, he's got a bunch of his family here. Here's another breakaway, and this time a goal. Oliver Bjorkstrand. Jeremy actually almost stopped playing hockey as a 16-year-old in Alaska when he got cut from his team. And McKinnon backhand. Such an explosive skater, right? He doesn't need much room at all. And look at the little flip chip over the shoulder of Bobrovsky. Perfect. Oh my God, that was sick. McDavid. Hurdle goes off. He's out of gas. Here's Pastrnak with a great chance, and he scores. Pastrnak, he's got 94, including 61 last year. Final 10 seconds, net empty, and McDavid scores! 2 goals in the final minute with the net empty to tie it up. Now Pastrnak with a chance to put it away. He scores! What a comeback. He passed it on. And here's a chance the other way and a score. Forsberg, and it's right on the stick of Alex DeBrincat for Team Matthews' goal. He rejoins the Devils very soon. Frank Petrano scores. That boy's head. Here's a 2-on-0 and a goal. Here's Marner and he scores. Goal in January. Here's Vetrano down low and they score. Pedersen redirected it in. Forsberg, Barzell, and Trocheck the line. They score. Jammed in at the front of the net by Philip Forsberg.
We'll move on. You get the gist of it, though. See on my part, that's what the puck looks like to the naked eye of watching hockey.
Here's
some trends we talked about, and our author goes a lot here about broadband and broadband wireless and convergence. And I'm going to say this to all of this. The big trend in networking, we'll see a bit of later in the chapter, is 5G. We know 5G is a protocol for cellular communications. Well, these are starting to reach homes. I remember 3 or 4 years ago going to a Verizon Research Center just outside of Boston and seeing the early reaches of what 5G would do at home. And when the Hudson Valley 5G from Verizon is available, but at very slow speeds. We'll learn speeds of broadband, which simply means high-speed internet. I guess I could have left broadband and wireless here, but we'll keep the whole thing X down. The speed is measured by megabits per second. Right now, my internet service provider ISP is Spectrum, and I have 2 connections in my house, both at 500 megabits per second, which is a half a gigabyte. I have two connections because I don't want to, Spectrum makes it hard to do any kind of modifications to their network to take up for different size houses and whatnot. I have Verizon 5G available to me, but at speeds at only 300 megabits per second. That speed would greatly affect how I use Zoom, how my son uses his PlayStation, how my wife works from home. So we haven't made the switch yet, but I'm hopeful as the technology gets there for their Verizon's 5G platform that we'll get higher speeds here where I live in Marlboro, and we'll see it in Poughkeepsie and nationwide. But that's the big trend, 5G wireless. Talked about a computer network being two or more connected devices. And the components of the very simplest network include, like you can even do two client computers, just people looking for information, or servers, what we talked about last week, network interface cards or wireless interface cards that we have in our laptops and our desktops. These are what lets our computers get on the internet to begin with. Connection medium we'll see some of today, and we hear acronyms or abbreviations like fiber optic, which is not really an acronym, but we call it FO, or Cat5 or Cat6 or Cat7 cable, also known as a PAT cord or Ethernet cable. We need hubs, switches, and routers. Hubs are really a thing of the past. A router is a device, and I'll show you one on the internet somewhere, and I'll show you what one looks like at home. It connects two networks. A switch is what extends our network behind our own router to allow for more connections. And a hub is a kind of switch that has no capabilities of packet switching. It just extends one port into 4 or 8. Our slide here, I took out a lot of slides from the chapter because I don't think they're pertinent anymore. And let me bring up my laser pointer. So we see a router, which is, again, a device that connects networks. And we see some things networked here. We have two physical connections with a connection medium to a switch. A switch lets many computers connect to one place to be able to connect to this router. We also have a server here. So an internet service provider will bring in some kind of transmission medium, namely fiber optics, to connect to this router. That will get us on the internet. And let me get my pen back. So I'm going to take all this and I'm going to make it kind of a cloud. Well, not really. It's pretty crappy cloud, actually. But we think of the internet as the cloud. So this router goes to our internet service provider, and they can connect to something like yahoo.com, let's say. Networks in large companies, I'm not even called large, we can even be small companies, start out with something called a local area network or LAN. This is typically a collection of both wired and wireless computers connected to switches or things called wireless access points or WAPS. Whom all connect to one router and get out to the internet. This slide, again, I left in, can show all the devices that are connected to one router. Let's take a look at us here at Marist. We have what's called a campus area network, where we have many buildings that connect to each other through routers to one source of internet, which is provided to us by Crown Castle. So that's our phones when we're on FoxNet, with all the devices that are wired in our classrooms and the library and in Donnelly, to our ticketing systems in, say, McCann, to the automated lighting around campus, all connected in one network with each other. If we were to take our campus and connect it to, say, Marist campus in Florence, now that would be what's called a wide area network, or a WAN. That's two companies' locations connected via the internet to each other. We have talked about client server computing, so I'm not going to bring it up again. I will talk about packet switching, because that's what these switch devices actually do. So think of, I just finished watching, well, I'm caught up on the Amazon Prime show, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I liked the movie when it came out earlier in the 2000s, and the show it's pretty entertaining. Well, if I were to download that entire show and try to watch it in one piece from Amazon, I would get a lot of latency on my computers, which means slow down. I would get a lot of the spinning wheel trying to catch up to the content that I'm looking at. But instead, what Amazon does to me, they send me the video piece by piece. And the putting back those pieces are what switches do. Kind of like we see here. So I'm here at Amazon. I'm over here at home. I'm getting Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I send the request out. It hits Amazon's web server, then their video content server through their AWS or Amazon Web Services cloud. And I start watching episode 1, season 1. It'll break that up for me. So smaller pieces are going through the internet to get to me. My router puts it back together, and I can watch the movie. And this is done at such speeds that the eye won't be able to look at it, but know that there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't know about that lets us watch our Netflix and Amazon Primes. Excuse me just one second. You may say, Al, what's made the internet work? So the internet's a collection of routers connected together to form one large wide area network. What's allowed that is a common protocol or rule called TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. It's the one standard worldwide that connects everyone to the internet. I'm not going to ask any of us about the 4 layers of this. And in fact, they took out the slide that had a model of TCP/IP. All I want you to know is what the acronym means and that it's enabled global e-business to actually work. So our next slide talks about different types of networks. I'm going to save signals for a moment. We've already talked about the local area network, wide area network, and campus area network. A MAN is a metropolitan area network. These are usually networks in one city, or it could also be a special type of wide area network that connects the same company to each other in the same city. Now my discussion on digital versus analog. What we see here is a diagram depicting what a modem is. A modem stands for modulator demodulator. What we need to know is that it takes an analog signal, like my voice coming into my microphone now talking to you all through Zoom, and our computer and through the modem will put it back as a digital signal that the computer can understand. So if we look right to left, we see a sine curve, which is always synonymous with analog signal. Our modulated demodulator breaks that up into a bar chart with zeros and ones that the computer can understand. When I started my computing life in 1985, 86, we connected to the internet through what's called dial-up. We would have modems in our desktop computers, and we would have that connected to a phone line, and we would dial a provider like AOL or CompuServe or Dow Jones News Service or Net Zero, and we would get a small piece of information that that provider had available to their own servers. Back in the 80s, the internet wasn't something that was public. It was still a private thing in the US Department of Defense to combat Russia and our other Cold War nemesis. Well, in the 90s, the internet started to get more public, and more of us were able to connect to the internet, and we brought up TCP/IP. We'll talk about domain name service in a bit, and we now have the latest and greatest of what Web 2.0 is. Web 2.1 was this period where we had AOL and CompuServe. Web 2.0 is where we are now, where anyone can publish to the cloud or the internet. And Web 3 is all talking about sensor networks, or really what makes crash detection and self-driving automobiles possible, or controlling our electrical campus-wide or heating campus-wide, and so on. We've talked about a lot of things so far, and I'm going to pause and show you some things real term in a second. After I talk about transmission medium, we've already talked about bandwidth, and it's how fast internet speed is. We've talked about what the internet is already and so on, but we're going to talk about a few pieces of cable now. A lot of us may know what a coaxial cable is, and that's a horrible thing, you know. Let's erase this. Let's put out my highlighter. So coaxial cable is that thick black cable you may have in your homes connecting, say, a television box, if we haven't cut over to streaming yet or cut the cable with cable. That cable will carry voice, data, and telephone signals to a community. Somewhat high speed, it's the foundation of what convergence is on a cable. Great in weather, pretty durable inside as well. Very extended cable lengths. Fiber optics, on the other hand, is a very fragile cable. It's made up of glass, where when you have one end of this fiber optic cable connected to a device, we can see the light waves coming at the other end of the cable through this glass. Very clean data, very low latency or slowdowns within data transmission, and usually is used to connect routers to switches, routers to each other, routers to an ISP, and it's the foundation of Optimum and Verizon's cable television offerings. Twisted pair, Cat 5, Cat 6, and now Cat 7, is a 150 meter length maximum cable used inside buildings to build local area networks and to connect wired devices to the internet, both at home and in offices. The name is what it is. You know, it has 8 sets of wires, 2 of which are connected together, and I'll show you what the cable looks like. I'll show you what a patch cable looks like. But if you're ever in the classroom, say in the library, or use the library computers, it's that yellow shielded cable that you see. That gives us internet from a switch in the library. So now I'm gonna stop. Get out of my presentation for a moment. Discard my great drawing. Go here. And we're gonna go to Google. And I'm gonna look up what a router is. I'm gonna show you a router. So what we see depicted here in this picture is a cable modem. A lot of these are installed in our homes, where a coaxial cable comes into the back of this, a Cat 5 or 6 cable attached to this device here, which is actually a switch, but we're going to call it a wireless router at home. These two would connect together to give us wireless internet at home. And we can see there's many different types of wireless routers. And we even have routers for woodworking, which was not my intent. Thus, I move to how Google works slide. So, how Google works. I entered my query for router. It was a pretty poor choice of a keyword. A bunch of regular desktop computers connected to a switch take that query request for information and accept it, and then sends it to Google's index server, where they've already had bots that have already searched for that term router and brought it back to Google, and it's ready to show me results. On top of that, Google uses a third-party PageRank software to give us that ranking on the Google page, and we get them coming back to us. The one caveat in all of this is if someone pays to jump the gun through their AdWords system, the best results don't always show up. But now let's do this. Cisco is a brand of router that connects companies to the internet. One looks like this. It looks like what's called a blade server, and I showed you one of those last week. That's those in those IBM cases, where we see we have inputs here for fiber optic and coaxial cable, and we have some for Cat 5 and 6 cable. We have the power supply on and off. A console cable is a special port in networking equipment where we use a cable called a console cable to connect our computer and be able to talk to this device's operating system directly. That console cable is a Cat 6 cable, but with the twisted wiring being different. Larger organizations will have even bigger and bigger routers. So let's go here and show you one of those. So this Catalyst router, which I'm going to show you now. Picture going to show, there we go. So what we see here is a router with built-in connections for switches. Actually, this is a switch. Sorry. A switch, again, lets us have our building wired. Let's talk, say we were in Hancock, actually in person for our class. Each classroom on each floor would have Cat 6 cable going from, say, the lectern in our class. That would go to an IT closet on each floor, where smaller devices with these connections where my mouse is going over are connected with what's called a patch panel. this cable from the patch panel is then patched into this switch to be able to provide that internet service for us. Well, we would have one of these big switches in our business if we had a lot of devices within 150 meters of where we need to connect it. Otherwise, we would just connect these from floor to floor using fiber optic cables. So let's see if I can get you to the one I actually wanted. This is just a chassis of a router to connect to the internet. It has 3 blades for fiber optic connections, and it has 3 more for redundancy. It has expansion slots where we could actually put integrated switches or other connections to connect other devices. This is a smaller switch we'd see in these IT closets like in Hancock, where we would have connections here to other switches or to a router via fiber optic. And we have 48 ports to be able to connect computers in our local area network. And it just shows the back view has redundant power supplies that are hot swappable, so we can take these out and put them back in. And we have redundant fans to keep these things cool. So I'm going to bring up this little diagram here. This shows how we get internet at home. I actually don't like this one. I have one drawn, which I'll add to Brightspace. But since we're here on the old browser, we can try to find one we like. Yeah, this is. So this is a typical wireless network in a home. So we have a broadband modem. That's that device I showed you earlier. There's a device that looked like one of these or something like it. We would have this in our home. We would have coaxial cable coming into our home, and that's what this is. Or it could be fiber optic if our provider is fiber optic. Coming into this modem. This modem would have a little switch built into it, so we could put in like 4 devices directly to it. In our picture here, though, our wireless router also has the same capabilities. So we want Wi-Fi at home. First, we buy our connection through, say, Spectrum. They install the coaxial cable to our home. They bring it into our house and connect the modem to it. We'll take a Cat6 cable. I'm going to show you in a minute. This Ethernet cable. We plug it into another device called a wireless router. Our technician or ourselves will configure what's called an SSID, or simply a network name like FoxNet. It'll set security on it with a password or a username and password. And once that setup is done, we now have wireless internet at home. So we see a printer connected and say a Xbox connected directly to our wired network with our wireless router. These could have gone into the modem as well. That means these will have a constant internet connection and will not have to search for one using Wi-Fi. And that's how we would typically print to our printers at home These days, 90% of printers are wireless now. The best signal we'll get for our entertainment consoles or our laptop or desktop computer is from the Ethernet cable, because there's always some slowdown or latency with the Wi-Fi network. That's kind of what internet looks like at home. We showed you what some devices look like. Now let's see what a coaxial cable looks like. Looks like a pretty good picture of a coaxial cable. So coaxial cable has a connector on one end and the same on the other. It has one strand of copper through the middle of the cable and layers of insulation to cut down on noise and reduce latency, and always a thick shield of various colors on the outside of it. While we're here, we can go, and it usually comes in giant rolls like this. You see, it's not a very expensive cable to buy. But let's look at a Cat 6 Ethernet cable and see what it looks like. And its connection will look something like this. This plastic thing where we can see the wires through it, the clear plastic, is what's called an RJ45 jack. And these come in various speeds and speeds it can handle. This one in particular can go at a gigabit per second. But I'm going to leave my friend Amazon and look at. And our Cat 6, Cat 5, Cat 7 cables look like this. We see a layer of insulation and a ground in the middle of this cable, a plastic rubber sheathing on the outside of it, and pairs of wires that are twisted. Now the ground, blue with light blue, brown with light brown, green with light green or white green, and red with white red. This is the twisted pair piece. These are all copper wires. To make this cable and have it usable, we would strip the cable so we have a piece of copper coming in and out of it, going into this RA45 jack. This shows our cable in a little more defined terms. We have our cables lined up here. We have the orange, the blue, the green, the red, twisted together. They go into a similar connector on our RJ45 connector. We use a device called a crimping tool, which is this, to make it. So we say press wires flat and arrange based on the type of cable. Once they're aligned, we see here orange, orange, blue, blue, green, green, red, red. We put it into the connector, we crimp it together, and we've made our cable. Our last transmission medium we're going to talk about is fiber optic. And it looks like this. It has a connector at one end with these two square prongs, limited, non-limited really duration for its signal strength and signal carrying, with another connector on the other side. So 3 ways we get some kind of medium at our home is coaxial, Cat 5 or 6 or 7, or fiber optic. So now that I've kind of told you about home internet, what I'd like you to do is ask whomever you live with when you're not at Marist to tell you who your internet supplier is, or ISP, the speed of your internet, and whether you have coaxial or fiber optic coming into your homes. So that's your question for this week's lecture prompt. I already talked about dial-up connections, how I started my journey with technology and the internet. We would dial a number through our computer. It would actually hear the dialing, and when it connected, it would sound something like this. And I'm sorry the text can't pick that up, but it would make a loud scrambled noise like that. When we were connected, we would hear something like, "You got mail," which was always a highlight that someone sent you an email. As email was back in the day, we didn't get a lot of them. Now I'm actually taking vacation from Greystone, and I looked at my phone today to check where my new ergonomic mouse was. I had 500 emails in one day. So I want to go back to the days where very rarely did I hear "you got mail." The first type of broadband internet started back in the 90s called DSL. Digital subscriber line. It was a type of dial-up connection, but with 7 times faster speeds. Then we got cable internet connections, which started at between 20 and 100 megabits now. Now we get speeds usually between 200 and 1 gigabit. Anything above 1 gigabit is really not price friendly. Fios, which is Verizon's fiber optic network, we get speeds up to 5 gigs as well, with most people getting a gigabit of service. If we can't get dial-up Fios or Optimum or coaxial-based internet connection like Spectrum, we can use satellite dishes, kind of like DirecTV, through a company called Hughes.net. And we get speeds up to 300 megabits per second. The only caveat is you need a clear sightline to the south so that this dish can pick up satellites that are to the south of us. T1 and T3 lines are really business case lines with very slow speeds. This used to be all we could get to make our local area networks. Now we use business fiber optics through companies like Verizon or Crown Castle to get us whatever speeds we really want to get. At Greystone, we get 500 meg dedicated fiber, whereas when I do work with Geodis, they get about 50 megs, but they have a lot less employees working in that little office as Greystone has at their headquarters. So how the internet works. We talked about internet protocol. So I must bring up what your IP address is. We've probably heard that a lot, but it's a number that looks like this. And that numbering standard is your home address on the internet. With Windows computers, we can get that by going to our search bar and typing CMD. And I'm going to run this as an administrator. And I'm going to go IP config. So this tells me my types of connection I have available to me. And right now I'm on a wired connection. And my IP4 address, this is my initial type of IP address, is 192.168.1.215. This default gateway of 192.168.1.1 is the IP address of the router I have at home. So my network is based on this. You may say, Al, what are these IPv6 numbers? They look real confusing. I can't possibly remember that. Well, we don't want you to remember it, but unfortunately, we've run out of these IPv4 addresses. All these new devices and cards and this and that, Apple Watch this, Vision Pro that. We don't have any more of these IPv4 numbers to give. So this IPv6 name and number and connection came about. We get a few billion possible creation data that we think will be sufficient. So all of that ties into what's called DNS. And so DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it's a naming convention of the phone book for the internet. To do another command here. And it shows me every thing that's available for my computer's means to connect to the internet. So we have a bunch of adapters, the one I just showed you. Now my configuration. My host name for this computer is called GPI-AMACR. Well, let me switch back here. That would be this computer one on this domain name system slide. And that's the lowest possible level to get into domain name system. The internet root domain is always notated by this dot. Top level domains are things like edu, com, gov, and so on. .us, .bda, you name it, you got it. That's just really the type of network we are. .net is originally meant for computer companies, .org for nonprofits, .gov for government, .com for commerce, and .edu for education. And there's hundreds of others these days. Our second level domain is really our name. Expedia, Google, Congress, Amazon, and so on. If we go further down the chain than that, we get third level domain host, like say we wanted to go to Google Maps. That would be maps.google.com. That's just a device or page off of the second level domain that equates to the top level domain and so on. And I already showed you my computer's name. That's all well and good. Al, we have this thing called DNS, we have this thing IP, how are they related? Well, we have these special servers or computers that host these IP addresses and their DNS names. And I can show you that by so I'm now using my computer's DNS server, which was the same as my router, to be able to get me to maris.edu through this command called traceroute. So this is going to show all the DNS stops or different networks it takes me to get to maris.edu. And we'll let this run. So right off the bat, maris.edu turns into 148.100.2.4. That's the public DNS IP address for maris.edu. And now we're showing hops here. So I've entered the Spectrum network. Charter is the parent company to Spectrum. I'm in Newark somewhere at another network. Light Tower is the old name for what's now Crown Castle. Now I'm on the Maris network somewhere. The asterisks show timed out or lost packets. So my computer is sending packets to maris.edu right now, little bits of data that I showed you earlier. And ultimately, I finally get to Maris about 61 milliseconds, which is pretty fast, but I did have some problems along the way. We will see DNS on our midterm. The only thing I want you to know about governance is that we need an ISP or internet service provider to give us access to the internet for whatever they want to choose for it. And, we talked about net neutrality as well already, and we talked about digital divide. all things to consider when looking at an ISP. It's horrible, but this is a example of monopoly. Usually municipalities will give access to their community to one provider, but not two. The only real exception is when Fios is in a community with a cable TV company. But other than that, you got one choice, and you can choose to pay them or not pay them. But that's how we get out there. I don't need this. We talked about IPv6. Internet 2, it should be Web 3. I guess it's a little different. Internet 2 is using very high-speed testing networks in universities for research and development. Then our author talks about things we do over the internet, email, news groups, FTP and Telnet are not here anymore. World Wide Web is actually a service of the internet. It's not the internet, even though we use them synonymously, but that's where the www in our URL comes from. So the HTTP, when we type a URL, it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And that's just a means we get out to the internet. So with our browsers today, I no longer have to type the HTTP //www.buffalobills.com, and that's a URL with the different layers of DNS. So I hit that, our browser changes that to a secure browser, and there we get the Bills website. We get other services through the internet, like voice over IP, which is telephony using the internet. If we get telephone at home these days, it's usually coming from a cable provider with voice over IP. It used to be the foundation of business telephones, but more and more we're moving to what's called unified communications, where we get some kind of voice, data, email, web conferencing, and fax from a provider on the internet. Greystone uses Ring Central. Marist, we have Teams available to us from Microsoft. Another tool of the internet that we can use connected to usually our firewalls, which we haven't talked about yet, but we'll talk about when we talk in security. A VPN is a way we can securely get from one place to another. Its real use is to extend wide area network locations for a business or allow a business's employees to connect to their network remotely. It's really not used for what a lot of your peers may use it for, and that's masking our location to get content that we may not supposed to get. But I'm not going to be a watchdog for anybody. But when we're using our devices on free Wi-Fi, make sure we have a VPN on. You want to protect yourselves from any kind of security issue. We talked about the web and all its HTTP, HTML, the programming language for the web. It's really getting replaced by Python. We talked about a URL. We talked about web servers already. We talked about how Google works. Google has about 85% share in search engines right now, not the 73 we see back in 2022. Bing is Microsoft's entry. Yahoo was really the first, and now they're one of the smallest. And we see Baidu and others. We talked about how Google works already and how we share internet on the web. Blogs, wikis, social networking, and vlogs. I'm not much into any of these. I do stream content for providers for entertainment. I will peek around, TikTok, and I'm old, so Facebook, and I look at Twitter all the time. And Twitter was great on Sunday. All my fellow St. John's fans were reacting to our head coach Rick Pitino just blasting the team and blasting their athleticness and how his coaches recruited. It was a great day to be a Johnny. Well, it wasn't, but I got all that from Twitter. I'm kind of new to vlogs with these New Heights fellas. I watch a lot of their reels, which are shorts of their YouTube show called New Heights. I usually don't sit through the hour and 55-minute entire vlog or podcast, but I pick and choose what I listen to. So here's just a snippet of.
If you want to know what Kylie thinks, let's see if she wants to share. Kylie!
What?
Do you want to share what you thought of the viral videos?
Yes.
I'm not actually going in front of the camera.
Do you want to share?
I was not surprised.
Not even at the mask.
Were you proud?
Am I surprised that you fully committed to wearing a freaking Nacho Libre Kansas City style mask for the entire after party? No. You displayed your redance moves.
Time out. Whoa. Have you ever seen my belly take over?
Jason.
The chunk?
Jason.
You've never seen me do the chunk?
The only reason it.
The future web is based on sensors, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and so on. It'll be interesting to see how you all's children react to the web once you get that far along in your lives. Cellular, our author takes us through a cellular history with competing standards at the, probably in 2018, no, probably 2015 at the time. Most of the world used this GSM protocol. Verizon and Sprint used CDMA, which was only in the US, but the whole world uses GSM now. 3G networks we see are very slow, 144 kilobits per second. It's not suitable for anything, so our author should really give us a better chance here, but no. 4G, which we're starting to leave behind, we have speeds up to 100 megabits per second. You can do pretty much anything with it as long as you got 1, 2, 3 bars, 2 bars of 4G and under. It's pretty bad. 5G, we have a gigabit capacity. We now see things like 5G plus or wideband 5G. 5G plus is AT&T. Wideband 5G is Verizon. We get speeds a gigabit or more. In fact, in Poughkeepsie, we get 5G plus service around campus and speeds upwards. I tested it on, when did I come to a basketball game? I think a couple weeks ago. I've been to the last few Marist men's basketball games. I don't remember which one I did a speed test, but it was 700 megabits per second, which is faster than I get at home over a wireless network. Bluetooth is a very short range, low powered way we use a network. Wi-Fi is just an acronym nowadays for wireless networking, wireless LANs. A hotspot is a way we connect to the internet using someone else's service. Not secure when we're using Verizon's hotspot, very secure when we use your phone as a hotspot. WiMAX is a dead technology. RFID is what now allows EasyPass to work. Tiny little tags in our devices, and pretty big in cars, constantly send out radio waves and looking for a receiver to catch it. When that receiver catches it, it takes the data from that tag, aligns it with a VIN number or license plate number of a car. It hits up the EasyPass servers or the whoever else is running an RFID system, and it takes tolls from us. Wireless sensor networks are simply a bunch of devices connected low range talking to each other. The foundation of smart homes, where we have a hub like my Alexa home device I have down here, or Google Home, or whatever we have out there. We have a bunch of devices connected to it through their own protocol. There's a couple standards for IoT communication. Zigbee is the predominant one. All these devices connected to a hub lets us do things we never thought we could do. Control our lighting, our shades, our air conditioning, our heating, our refrigerators, and so on. The foundation of park assist in vehicles or lane assist in vehicles, crash detection in vehicles, fall detection in my Apple Watch, all based on little sensors transmitting data. It's the foundation. I know we have some student athletes in class. It's the foundation to wearables that your coaches may provide you to track how well you're performing physically in whatever environment you're in. And that's really the foundation of Web 3.0. And that's it for this week, everyone. Remember the question about who your home internet service provider is, how fast it is, and what type of devices you have there. And we'll look to talk to you again next week. Thanks, everyone.